Welcome to the first event of St. Johnsbury Poemtown 2016, our second year. We're very pleased to be able to bring Poemtown to you again. This is the first reading event of the month, and we're happy to have you all here. I want to thank Alicia Hingston and Ann Campbell for bringing the concept of Poemtown St. Johnsbury here. The committee members, Sharon and Bill Biddle, Beth Cannell, Katie Moritz, and others who worked very hard, interns who've distributed posters, and the poets themselves who entered this year. And as you can see, there is a very long list. We do have these out in front available for those of you who want to know where the poetry is posted. And we are fortunate enough to have the poem entitled Galway Canal Reads to Me at the Athenaeum by Heather Stearns, and it is in the second window in the front. Most of you have seen the Poemtown poster out and about and know what the events are. I will give you a quick rundown. The poems are placed in the business windows. There will be 4 noontime readings here at the gallery at 12 o'clock every Wednesday at 12. There is a poetry conversation entitled Listen at Cafe Gatto Nero on Thursday, April 14th at 7 p.m. There will be a poetry slam at the tap room with Jeff Hewitt on April 21st at 7 p.m. We have a junior jam this year. We have included our youth in Poemtown this year. They will be doing original and favorite poems being read by elementary and middle school students, and that will take place Friday, April 22nd at 5:30 p.m. Our featured readers this year are Peter Money and Partridge Boswell with music by Whit Van Meter. They will be here Wednesday, April 27th at 7 p.m. Their program is entitled Los Lorcas, and under the theme Listen, they will be combining poetry with music. And finally, the reception for Poemtown Poets will take place at Catamount Arts on Friday, April 29th, 5 to 7. And just a quick mention, here we have a program tonight that's a First Wednesday's program entitled Understanding Islamic Extremism. That is 7 o'clock upstairs on the second floor. There's information out there about this program by former CIA Chief of Counterterrorism, Haviland Smith. And on Wednesday, April 13th, we have our Arts and Culture series, the Postcard Age. Helen Chantal Pike will discuss history of postcard and its developments through the years. I'd also like to tell everybody that this month has National Library Week. From April 10th to the 16th, we will be offering coffee and donuts for the first hour after opening, and free library cards for non-residents. And for any child and youth who signs up for a free card this month will also get a free book. So we're happy to be able to do that. It should be lots of fun next week. And April 16th on a Saturday at 11 a.m., Reed Lindbergh will be here for a special story time, and there will be crafts and refreshments. Now, our first event, we decided this year that it would be an open mic, and we would have each one of the staff feature a poet that we liked to read. Today, it's Bob who will be leading the way, reading poetry from Larry Levis. There will be refreshments after the program. Thank you.
One correction to the upcoming events. Next Wednesday's event is actually not the postcard event because the woman had to reschedule that. So what it is, and this should be of interest to you, I speak to all of us, It is a, let's just say it this way, a moth ripoff, and we can't say it's moth storytelling because that's like a trademarked word. So it is called Say What, and what I would like, what it is people telling moth-like stories, so nothing written down. You have to have a 5-minute story. So hopefully we have a gang of people we will select from the audience, and or, as Scott suggested, and it was a good one, if you would like to be a ringer storyteller, so that in our back pocket we have a coterie of readers, please do that. I will be reading, and let's just say it is not an earth-changing story like you often hear in The Moth. It is a real story, as remembered and affirmed by yours truly. So one would not want to miss that. I am reading from this poet, Larry Levis. This man died in 1996. He's one of these people who I never heard of. And I say that because I studied poetry in college. I was at the University of Iowa for a while. Larry Levis was at the University of Iowa long before me. But I never saw his name written anywhere, and probably all of us have come to know artists or musicians or somebody because you read it in somebody else's admiration of them, or somebody says something about a person and you're curious about who is that person. I never heard this guy's name. Last year in the Arts and Culture series, a person gave a talk about Walt Whitman. I called him this year and said, do you have any other talks? He said, I can talk about this guy, Larry Levis. I said, who's that? And he told me who Larry Levis was. And I said, great, because I trusted this guy could do an interesting talk, and he did. And when I found out about this person, I started reading his poetry online. He has published, I think he published 4 books during his lifetime. 2 or 3 have been published posthumously. And I think he's an amazing poet who I never heard anybody say anything about. That said, I'm going to read 3 of his poems and try to be relatively brief. And in our collection, we have 4 books by him. This is the most recently published. What I was going to say was, so I never heard of the man Larry Levis, but you know when you buy a new car, and then you've never seen this car before, and then you're driving on the highway, and it's like they're everywhere. I think a week after I heard about this guy Larry Levis on National Public Radio, there's a review of The Darkening Trapeze, the latest posthumously published book of poetry by Larry Levis. So it's like, I had heard about the Volkswagen the week before, and the next week I'm looking around and there's like Larry Levis everywhere. So I was just amazed to find a poet so good that I had never heard of. So I'm going to read from 2 of these books, 3 of these were published posthumously. One is All Elegies, called Elegy. So I'm going to start with this. And then at the end, I'm just going to read a bit about the editor of the most recent volume to say a little bit about some background on Larry Levis. This is called The Poem Returning as an Invisible Wren to the World. Once there was a poem. No one read it, and the poem grew wise. It grew wise, and then it grew thin. No one could see it perched on the woman's small shoulders as she went on working beside the gray conveyor belt with the others. No one saw the poem take the shape of a wren you could look through like a window and see all the bitterness of the world in the long line of shoulders and faces bending over the gleaming, machined parts that passed before them, the faces transformed by the grace and ferocity of a wren you could look through like a lens to see them working there. This is not about how she threw herself into the river, for she didn't, nor it is about the way her breasts looked in moonlight, nor about moonlight at all. This is about the surviving curve of the bridge where she listened to the river whispering to her when the wren flew off and left her there with the knowledge of it singing in her blood, by which the wind avenges, by which the rain avenges, by which even the limb of a dead tree leaning above the white, swirling mouth of an eddy in the river that once ran beside the factory window where she once worked shall be remembered when the dead come back and take their places beside her on the line, and the gray conveyor belt starts up with a raspy hum again, like a heavens. This is called In the City of Light. The last thing my father did for me was map a way. He died, and so made death possible. If he could do it, I will also, someday, so be honored. Once, at night, I walked through the lit streets of New York, from Gramercy Park Hotel, up Lexington, and at that hour, alone, I stopped hearing traffic, voices, the racket of spring wind lifting a newspaper high above the lights, the streets wet and shining, no sounds. Once, when I saw my son be born, I thought how loud this world must be to him, how final. That night, out of respect for someone missing, I stopped listening to it. Out of respect for someone missing, I have to say this isn't the whole story. The fact is, I was still in love. My father died, and I was still in love. I know it's in bad taste to say it quite this way. Tell me, how would you say it? The story goes, wanting to be alone and wanting the easy loneliness of travelers, I said goodbye in an airport and flew west. It happened otherwise. And where I'd held her close to me, my skin felt raw and flayed. Descending, I looked down at the light, lacquering fields of pale vines and small towns, each with a water tower, then the shadow of wings, then nothing. My only advice is not to go away, or go away. Most of my decisions have been wrong. When I wake, I lift cold water to my face. I close my eyes. A body wishes to be held, and what can you do about that? Because there are faces I might never see again, there are two things I want to remember about light and what it does to us. Her bright green eyes at an airport, how they widened as if in disbelief, and my father opening the gate, a lit and silent city. And one more, and then a bit about it. And this is a short section from a very long poem, very long, called Oaxaca. Actually, it's called The Perfection of Solitude, a Sequence. And this is one portion of this poem, and this is called Turban. And this speaks to some of the influences on Larry Levis. Sometimes, in the Bruegel paintings, the children who are skating hold perfectly still for a moment. I could have counted them there if I wanted to. Or a boy has just fallen out of the sky, and no matter how hard the water is, the splash on the canvas is always silent, and it can only grow more so. And the water rising for centuries around the boy is famous only for the little silence it displays. The way the paint has cracked slightly on the canvas is meant to remind you that this is, after all, only a painting in which Bruegel has destroyed time. And Rembrandt, smiling at this, still has to put his house up for sale before he can paint another self-portrait. This time he is St. Paul with a wry turban on his head. There is a kind of forgiveness in it all. He looks as if he is about to smile, but he does not. And then after a few moments, it looks as if he will never smile again. The turban is the dirty white of a popular beach. So just one section of this longer poem called The Perfection of Solitude. I don't normally like to read about a poem, about a poet, but I am like a groupie of this dude. So I feel compelled to bring him to life a little bit more. The poems obviously stand alone. They stand for themselves, and it's fascinating poetry. But just a little bit about him. From the editor, David St. John, of this book, The Darkening Trapeze. He was a friend of Larry Levis and the editor of this book and an editor of some other books of his. So he talks just a bit about some of the influences of this person, Larry Levis. For me, one of the most fascinating aspects of editing The Darkening Trapeze was to be reminded again in Levis's poetry what I'd already learned from a lifetime of conversations with Larry, that he was profoundly influenced by 20th century painting and photography, and by world cinema as well. Fellini's influence permeates the poem La Strada, and the haunted presences of surrealist painters and writers echo throughout Levis's wry poem, Carte de l'assassin à Monsieur André Breton. Yet these are only two examples. In his earlier poetry, Levis celebrates and engages in some of his finest early work, the paintings of Caravaggio and Edward Hopper, as well as the remarkable photographs of Joseph Kudelka. Still, in the poems of the Darkening Trapeze, it is the influence of the English painter Francis Bacon that feels to me most constantly present and most powerfully resonant. So there's 4 or 5 pages of work by David St. John about Larry Levis in this book, The Darkening Trapeze, and these 4 volumes are in our collection, so they are available for your perusal. And at that, I will turn the program back to Shara and or to the first person who jumps to the podium.
Thank you, Bob. It's nice poetry. I would like to make a point that the programs this year are slightly different than the way we had them organized last year. We had invited people for each of our readings to read. This year, the staff will open, but the remainder of the time will be an open mic. So we invite everyone to come to either listen or share in those last 45 minutes, followed by a little lunch refreshment so you don't starve to death by not eating during your lunch hour. So we have enough here to spend 5 or so minutes for each one to read. Who do I have? All right, Michael.
Thank you. Michael, if you want to move the whole thing aside.
Sorry about this. I left my little notebook of poems at home, so I have to do it the new-fashioned way. Thank you, Shara, Bob. I was not familiar with Mr. Levis. I don't even know how many poets there are, period, but how many are just sort of like one person bought his books or something, you know, it's like, I would say it's in the, you could maybe guess, I mean, but there's probably tens of thousands of really excellent poets in this country, and I've never heard of them, so thank you. And to the Athenaeum for all of this Poemtown stuff. It really elevates us as poets and poetry each year. I just want to say, as a part of National Poetry Month, 3 of us are here we're members of Northeast Storytellers. And once again, the Northeast Storytellers will be doing 3 things. I think they're the same things we did last year, although we did a 4th we dropped. One is remembering Robert Frost. That happens next Tuesday from 2 to 3 over here at the Good Living Senior Center, which otherwise known as the St. Johnsbury House. And the impetus for that was that the state of New Hampshire created a Writers' Hall of Fame, New Hampshire Writers' Hall of Fame, and then put this guy, Robert Frost, in it, thereby claiming him for New Hampshire. But I know that a lot of people over here in the Green Mountain State are rather proud of Robert Frost being a Vermont poet. So this is a way to, you know, dredge up some of our recollections, read some of his poetry, whatever. We had a pretty good turnout last time. We also had media came last time. That was nice. Judith Ishikawa, you can tell by her last name, she spent some time in a certain country. Will be once again doing her haiku workshop. That'll happen Sunday, April 24th in West Berg. She is the director of the library there, and that's why she'll be doing it. Concepts are oneness, intimacy, emptiness, uniqueness, and naturalness. And it'll be put in the context of the classic Vermont conversations. We had a big crowd for that last year. Both of these are free, by the way. And then with the St. Johnsbury World Maple Festival coming in, Brooke for the second year is doing maple stories, poems and stories. People will be reading them. That's Saturday, April 30 from 2 to 4 down at the St. Johnsbury Welcome Center, outside in the park area there. But if the weather's inclement, you go on inside. So it's kind of a crossing between the whole maple thing and whatever. Bring your story if your grandpa used to go out there and collect maple sap or whatever. In between all this, the Poetry Society of Vermont is doing some readings at the Phoenix Bookstore in Burlington. I went there last year. Steve and a couple other members of the group have helped me sort of polish some of my quatrains. I was thinking about publishing them in a format. I read them out there. Now I'm going to use it as a deadline. I'm creating a Kindle ebook out of those poems. I'm going to try to have it ready for that, which is April 23rd out of Phoenix, so I can just sort of finally have something in book form. If you haven't been to Montpelier, several of the members have poems out there, including George Mathon. George Longenecker was 3 places. Judy Janu has a wonderful poem up in the library. David Stauffer, some of you know him. It's a great thing, Montpelier. Okay, so anyway, having put you to sleep, now I'm going to have this challenge of getting you to wake back up again for some poetry. Which reminds me that the Poemtown committee decided to post of mine here in St. Johnsbury is called the 9 Worst Words in the English Language. And the 9 worst words in the English language are, would you like to hear one of my poems? The theme is listen. So I spend another 13 lines trying to encourage people to sit down and listen to poets every once in a while, because who knows, maybe God is speaking through them, right? These are all at my blog. All you got to do is go there, click the poems tag, and you'll get my latest stuff. It usually goes up there now. This I wrote on March 11th. I guess I haven't been doing much writing lately. It's called Life's a Country Song. Should I go a-wandering to fix a life gone wrong, or go on long a-pondering how life's a country song? This one's called Impossible Dreams. I wrote this the same day. I guess I was feeling rather prolific. My mother was raised in a gypsy camp, my father in hell, it seems. So I became a nomad tramp chasing impossible dreams. This one is on the same theme, same day, a little elf. Mother was raised by a gypsy, father by the devil himself. It's when we moved to Poughkeepsie, I became a little elf. Yes, you're allowed to laugh. Backdrop of tragedy. February 5th, fasten your belt. The bell has rung, the bee has stung. We have begun, fasten your belt. This one requires a little bit of knowledge of poets and their muses. It's called You Beat Beatrice and Laura. As muse you beat Beatrice and Laura. The problem is your poet. He belongs in a circle of hell, and besides his sonnets are weak. So, Beatrice and Laura. Beatrice was Dante's muse, and Laura was Virgil's. This is Your Scrambled Yoke, January 28, 2016. Not for me, your gentle folk, not for me, your scrambled yoke. I have found the peace I love, the one the nuns and gurus speak of. No, I'm not going to read. I'll do one more. This is called Greatest Unsolved Mystery, January 23rd. Atlantis, Sasquatch, Bermuda Triangle, Egyptian pyramids, Loch Ness Monster, Voynich manuscript, Shroud of Turin, Marphalites, Roswell UFO, Taos Hum, Greatest Unsolved Mystery, you. Thank you.
I'd be happy to read something, but you guys are going to have to bear with me, and I'm going to plug this too. So, this is not my own poetry, and it's very raw. Some of you may know that in addition to being a librarian here at the Athenaeum, I'm a translator, and I work in particular with a Syrian short story writer named Osama El Omar, and he will be here at the Athenaeum on May 24th. We're going to be doing a reading here, and I hope you guys can come back for that. He's in the States now. He escaped from Syria early and doing his best to make it as a writer here. In Syria, he had published 3 books of short stories and a book of poetry. As it happens now, he's driving a taxi cab in Chicago, but we're working to get his stuff out there, and this is very raw, but this is something that he and I worked on last night. We translate by phone usually, and he's preparing to go out to Boise State to participate in an Arab poetry conference, and we were working on his presentation. And he had pulled out the work of a young Syrian poet named Mu'adh Zamriq, which we translated last night, again rough. The first lines are Osama's introduction to this poem, kind of poem-like themselves. I will tell God everything. A Syrian child spoke these words before she was slaughtered. I will tell God everything. A devastating sentence, a gloss on the greatest tragedy of human history. A sentence weighed down with torment. Hundreds and thousands of poems born like this one to tell the story of human madness, to tell the story of volcanoes of hatred that no sooner have they gone dormant than they erupt again. The young Syrian poet Mu'adh Zamriq, in his poem The Dance of the Broken and Disappointed Man, says, and now Osama is quoting Mu'adh Zamriq, the wounds are cold and my heart is laughing. The lovers are happy, the soldiers are on open leave. The day laborers drink beer when work is done. The sun offers kindness to everyone. Flowers are distributed freely. Children eat ice cream. The man sits by the riverbank reading a book. The woman chats with her neighbors. The tyrants fall in the well. I dance and dance, my heart cold like a knife in the back. The lovers share the wailing grief, and the soldiers drink beer and polish the bullets that wind the rope around their necks. The man throws himself into the river. The thin fingers of children are made into lighters for the cigarettes of war. And the woman prays faithfully to a passing God. The tyrants trample the grapes of life. Don't you know what it means when a broken, disappointed man begins to dance? So that's going to be a little more polished, but there's a first glimpse. I believe I can say that's the first time that poem has ever been read in English. So thank you very much. And the other thing I want to plug is it next week or the week after that I'm doing it, Shara?
The week after next.
The week after next, after Shara. I'm going to be reading a couple poems by a really interesting American poet, Bum Kong Tuan, Cambodian-American actually, a survivor of the Cambodian genocide who was carried out from that genocide on his grandmother's back, came to the States at age 10, published his first book of poetry a year or two ago, found poetry in the Long Beach, California Public Library when he stumbled on the works of Charles Bukowski, writes in that vein, but writes to tell his own story, to tell the story of genocide. And can I read one poem from this too, just to give you a foretaste? Because I heard some echoes of this actually in Larry Levis and some of the Ghosts. This is called The House of Many Voices. You can get lost if you pay attention to the creaking in the sad murmurs underneath the floorboard. I told my wife, whatever you do, don't look over your shoulder or you will be snagged by a ghost of rice paddies and water buffalo, its heavy black hair still wet from the mist of yesteryear, or a ghost of the missing son, whose memory lives in the furtive glances of uncles and aunts, in the grandmother who refuses death. There are many ghosts here. Listen. I was caught by one of these ghosts the other day, and I am telling you this, passing it on to you, not in some spirit of generosity, but so that I can be free. That's his introduction to the book, and we'll read more of those in 2 weeks. Thanks.
Steve, Judy?
We're unprepared. We came to listen.
Well, we'll have more time for refreshments. I will just give you a taste of who I will be reading next week, which is Ursula Le Guin. She's really known mostly for her fantasy writing. She's received several awards, one of them being the National Book Foundation Medal. But I stumbled on her poetry and like it very much. This book was published in 2015, and I'll just read one. Kitchen spoons, new. My spoon of Spanish olive wood from the olive pit in Corning, Tehama County, California, just off the I-5, is light but has a good heft, short and well-rounded, the right size to stir with. It's at home in my hand. Mate brown of olive mead, dark streets with olive skin, its grain clear and fluent. The grain of a wood is the language of the tree. I oil the spoon with olive oil, and it tells me gray-green leaves, brief, fragrant blossom foam, tough life, deep roots, long years. Spain that I had never seen, California and summer. Summer. Old. My plated steel mixing spoon is from our first apartment on Holt Avenue in Macon, Georgia in 1954. The downstairs of Widow Killian's house, furnished with her furniture and kitchenware, an ordinary heavy tablespoon, plain and with good balance. The left side of the end of the bowl, misshapen, worn away by decades, maybe a century of a right-handed person mixing and beating with it. First Mrs. Killian, then me. I liked it so well that when we moved, I asked her if I could take it. That old thing? My goodness, yes, with a soft laugh. You can take it if you want it, child. Now I would like to invite you to a table of refreshments, and you're welcome to sit here for a time if you'd like and enjoy the room. Thank you so much for coming, and remember, we'll be here at 12 o'clock next Wednesday.
All right, thank you, Tara. You're welcome.
Thank you.